Oh,
And we're
all
on.
right. We're back. Yes. So today we're going to talk about a book called Tetralogue, which is by Timothy Williamson, a professor of logic. And this book is a dialogue. It's a long dialogue in which four characters are on a train together talking about stuff. I
Oh,
think I saw a video of him say he said he was inspired to write this book because of irresolvable conflicts.
Right. Good starting points because we ended right on in the last book about what argument can and can't do, and this one is going to be like direct confrontation with that. Although this book is more aimed, I think, at I don't know people that aren't in the philosophical world, more kind of novices to the world, or it's at least written in a way so that anyone can enjoy the book. There's not a lot of I don't know
Jargon.
philosophical jargon, and name dropping. There's only two names dropped in the entire book, I believe. Nietzsche and Wittgenstein are dropped, but that's about
Aristotle too.
it. Sorry, Aristotle, 3 names are dropped. That's about it, though.
Tarski's in there, but very short, very briefly too. But yeah. I mean, it's very, very light on the names.
Yeah, you don't have to know any of these people to get a hold of the ideas. That's one of the things I liked about this book. I think it's a really just kind of fun book to get you, I don't know, liking philosophy again and interested in maybe certain problems in philosophy. And I think a really important one is how on earth do you get people to change their opinion? Right? That's going to be a big problem because that's what we can't do on YouTube, apparently. All we do is just end up screaming and then it's the end, right? Or so people believe sometimes. So how do you want to tackle this book?
Good question. I mean, it's of course it's divided into what four chapters, but you know what I think? Let me just say, just overall, I think if anything, the most of this book is wrapped up in the modern problem of relativism. Don't you think that's really what's at the core of this book? I mean, there's other stuff, but this kind of just it comes out of this issue of relativism. I mean,
The heart of this book is a sustained attack on relativism, and
it actually ends when Zach is okay. Spoilers.
Spoilers.
the book ends. Spoilers.
Yes, it ends when Zach gives up and decides to hit on the woman in black.
Actually, did you notice at the very end of the book? So I mean, like he's portrayed Zach. Well, I mean, honestly,
By the way, Zach is the relativist character.
he's the relativist. There's 4 characters: Sarah, Bob, Zach, and Roxana. I'll talk about them in a little bit, but Zach is a relativist, but he's given his fair share of beatings, basically, from each one of these characters. He comes in as kind of a peacemaker, and yet he ends up getting the fair share of the critique in this book, although not all of it. But I like at the end, at the very end, the book took one last swipe at him as the book ended, right? So he gets up and he leaves, and he goes to this woman that one of the characters, Bob, thinks is a witch. And he goes over to her, and he says, he talks to her. They can't hear what he's saying, and he's engaging with her, and she's smiling, and they begin to see that he's influencing her maybe to be a relativist, and they actually kind of say, Bob is worried like that she's a witch and she's going to put a spell on him, and he says, does he look enchanted? And then Sarah, the scientifically viewed woman, she says she looks enchanted. In the end, it's almost as if Zach is the witch. He's the one putting kind of these enchantments on people. So I think, like, again, it took one last swipe on relativism as kind of a false enchantment in the philosophical world.
So Zach was the Phantom Menace.
He was the Phantom Menace, yes. From a certain point of view. So like I said, there are 4 characters. There are 4 points of view represented in this book. Sarah, she's the scientific, experimental kind of, out of the modern scientific viewpoint. There's Bob. He's the traditional viewpoint, mired in kind of religion and kind of long family traditions and things like this. Zach is the relativist, and Roxana is the cold, strict, logic, hair-splitting kind of character. But what I liked about this book is each character lives who they are, right? Sarah acts out her ideology or her thought process, right? Mm-hmm. So she's scientific. She's experimental. So Sarah is one of the few characters in the book that actually changes her ideas. She's willing to accept evidence and contrary arguments, and she'll revise her theories to make them stronger and better, much in the same way scientific theories work, right? So she argues and thinks like a scientist. Literally, in the book, you can see this happening, right? The other characters don't do this. Bob is traditional and foolish. He's often taken in by those around him. He's influenced by his grandmother into believing in witches, right? He was part of a cult for a while, and he was beaten as a child, so he accepts corporal punishment. Basically, he just takes in everything from the world around him, and he kind of just unthinkingly puts it into his life view, right? He can't make abstract arguments. He can't follow abstract arguments very well. Everything needs to be very earthy and concrete for him, which makes him very good at summarizing arguments, actually. He can bring them down to earth. So he always does a pretty good job, actually. I like the way he summarizes some of the arguments. Zach is the relativist, so he's portrayed as kind of very slippery. You can never pin him down. Zach will never change his view during this entire train ride. He's the one character that seems almost completely unfazed by anything, even though he's given most of the criticism in this entire book. He's completely unfazed because to him it's just that nothing ever touches him. He wants all views to kind of coexist in harmony and peace, and he's more concerned with power than truth, and he wants to be kind of a peacemaker. And then finally there's Roxana. She's logical and hair-splitting. It's interesting that she comes in, but she never puts forth a view.
Yeah.
She only critiques other views. So again, she kind of lives out her logical life in the book, right? She doesn't put forth any theories. She takes Sarah's theories or Zach's theories or Bob's and just logic splits them. So each one of these characters is the living embodiment of their theory. So they're more kind of four ideas sitting in a train than anything else, which was clever.
You know, I agree. I really like what you said. The personalities of the characters. I think one thing Zach was another thing he was interested. He was interested in power, but like you said, but he's interested in power in the sense that his main goal is liberation, right?
Yeah.
He wants to liberate people from power. I think is his key concern. Mm. I always kind of thought as I was reading this, though. I mean, in a way, that the train ride, it's a good place to have this conversation because nobody can escape. Because this book is kind of like a philosopher's dream, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, as you study philosophy, you wish people would actually sit down and hash this stuff out rather than in real life. You run into a relativist and he's just like, well, screw you, bye. Right? These characters are actually willing to sit down and chat for longer than 10 minutes without being childish and running off. Despite getting pounded sometimes.
How long is this train ride?
It
seems like they're on the train for a very long time.
It was about the same length as the Republic. How long was the Republic supposed to be going on? I can't remember how long. Like a 20-hour conversation or something. maybe that was a long. It was a long train ride.
Man.
Or maybe it seemed long from your point of view.
Yeah. Well, of course. Now let's bring the relativism here. It's kind of interesting what they did with the train here. Yeah, because the train, of course, was kind of symbolic for this progress, this force being forced to face other ideas. That's why how they refer to relativism as this used car throughout the entire thing. And then when Zach is talking to the woman in black, the supposed witch, Roxanne says at least he has found a customer for his used car. Sarah says, I hope she won't pay too much for it. And then Bob says, when it breaks down, she can always go back to the train.
Yeah. So the train is leading somewhere, right? And I think at the end, most of the characters get somewhere. I don't think Zach does.
Mm.
I don't know if Roxana does either. But I think Bob and Sarah have gone further down the road. So the book opens with Bob and Sarah arguing about whether witchcraft is real, which is my kind of argument. It does sound like an argument you have on YouTube. Is witchcraft real? Let's talk about it.
Open up YouTube and you find yourself engaged in just the weirdest argument you could ever imagine.
So each one of them legitimately believes their viewpoint. Of course, Bob actually is the Christian viewpoint, right? I mean, like, he didn't want to write Christian, so he changes to witchcraft. So Sarah's arguing the scientific viewpoint, and Bob is a Christian who's disguised as someone that believes in witchcraft. So he's arguing a traditional view, and neither of them can come to any kind of conclusion here. They're just butting heads, and there's some interesting things. Bob says that Sarah has a faith of science, in other words, the faith that everything can be explained, and Sarah kind of persists in saying that science is the best method we have for exploring the world. Neither of them will give in, but that's where the book starts. Its real beginning is where Zach comes in. Zach, what Zach wants to do is he wants to find a way to stop this arguing. So that's the point of this book. How do we resolve these kind of arguments? And Zach has a way. He's come up with a way, and you can, if you go to university, you'll hear this more than you like. This is academia. It's very much in academia. Relativism. Zach's basic idea is that everybody has a point of view, and that's their point of view, and every point of view is legitimate.
It's true for you.
It's true for you, right? I mean, like, you could say that for him, like, the world becomes this kind of, like, what is that, overlapping magisteria? Like, a non-overlapping magisteria. That's it. Like, so, instead of religion and science, like, world views become like non-overlapping magisteria. Right. Statements about the world simply don't overlap anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, in a weird way, it's like it's almost as if like he's kind of resigning people to not be able to talk about the world anymore.
Yeah. I mean, they go around saying that like Zach is, in a sense, changing the subject. He's changing the subject from talking about the world to just talking about yourself. Right, that's one of the accusations made at Zach eventually.
Yeah. I don't know. Oh, please.
I'll go. I just want to say, like, Zach gets quite a hammering in this book. I thought it'd be kind of fun just to go through and find some. Because maybe we might have mentioned this before, but I think relativism is, despite it being so like talked about in the literature, in any philosophy course you'll have a section on relativism and stuff like this. But like, despite it being like getting hammered in all these arguments, relativism just will not die. Relativism comes up again and again and again and again. Relativism is intuitive. Relativism is everywhere. People just naturally fall into it without having gone to any philosophy class, really. So it might be like a real symbol of our times, relativism, at least in the college-educated zone. Anthropology. But this zone, I mean, like, even as when I talk to my coworkers and people like this, they really just unthinkingly make statements about this stuff all the time, right? It's just, viewpoints. It's your morality is just your opinion, etc., right? This is a fact. This is a value. Facts can be talked about. Values are just opinions. We can't really discuss those. So I thought, but despite all this, I thought it'd be kind of fun to just go through the book and find what are some of the positive points of relativism. What are some of the things that might lead someone to find relativism as attractive? What were the positive aspects highlighted in this book of relativism? I just found a couple littered throughout the first couple chapters and the last one too. Number one was what you mentioned just now was, I think he wanted to say, like, Zach thinks, and maybe there's something to this, the psychological effect of relativism is positive, or can be positive, for the holder and those around him. This is one of Zach's points, harm is reduced, because if you can't say that your point of view is right, you don't, or maybe you won't feel you have a right to impose your viewpoint on someone else. But I mean, this is purely guesswork. It's psychological guesswork. It doesn't always happen this way, nor this doesn't necessitate things to happen this way. But like, I mean, it's psychologically viable to think like as soon as you've really gone hardcore relativist, you'd lose your confidence in asserting your viewpoint over anyone else. So you'd like lessen the amount of harm you might do. Another one was harmful. Oh, again, this fits with the other one. Another point he made is harmful disputes are avoided. Relativism. Zach views relativism as a way of living with problems, not solving them. Right. So we can all live together without harming each other. He's very concerned with harm, Zach. I think, and
he mentions typical liberal kind of his focus on harm.
That's a good point too. Yeah, with his focus on harm, like if you take somebody like Haidt, right? His analysis of liberals, right? And last, I kind of thought this was interesting too. Zach really appeals strangely directly. I thought for him, he appealed to the fact that a relativist is open and upfront about where he's coming from. He's modest, right? He's an honest guy. He's modest. He's like saying, "This is just my point of view. I'm not playing God here. I'm not saying I know everything. I'm going to be really open up in front and say this is where I am. I'm not claiming any more knowledge than I can possibly have." I think this really, again, this is an appealing point to people. They don't want to overstate. They want to be humble. So relativism is a very appealing philosophy in that sense too.
This is where all of his points start to fall apart, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All of it does. I mean, it's just
every level.
Yeah.
It collapses in on itself. I mean, for the exact reasons, right? I think exactly that. If I was going to give a good point to relativism, it's an attempt to remind people that they're not as smart as they think.
Yeah.
But that's where it fails, right? It fails even right there. Because, as pointed out in the book, is one of the points I liked, is if relativism is an attempt to deal with the fear of how fallible human beings really are, and it wants us to be tolerant, well, it's going to fail because it doesn't remind us of how fallible we are in our ignorance, right? It tells us we're correct.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right. It doesn't say to be humble. It says you're right just as you are, which is... It can be okay, but there are moments when this is actually kind of frightening, right? By justifying people's prejudices, there's a possibility that someone could take this as a kind of a justification to impose or do whatever they like, and because I don't know. Let's try to not make this as long as our other videos. I'll just get right down to it. I think ultimately what this book is trying to say about relativism, and disagree with me if you want, I think ultimately the reason why relativism fails is because relativism is undermined by people having to exist in the world. This is what undermines relativism. Because it attempts to act as if it's not in the world, but it is in the world. So if all Zach had to be was this entity floating outside the world, he could say, well, this and that, and your point of view, but he's always undermined by the fact that he lives in the world. So he does make true or false statements. He does have thoughts about the world. When he gets his leg broke, he admits he does go to a Western doctor. And when Bob notices that he doesn't believe in witchcraft, he's like, well, you're just paying lip service to me. Obviously, Zach is making judgments about the world. He just doesn't feel that he has to, impose them on anyone else, but he's still doing it. Right? He's always foiled by the fact that he's in the world. And he's trying to pretend that he's not making the only correct judgment, right? This is where he's getting just caught up again and again, is the fact that he makes statements about the world, and he's like, well, I'm not really making statements about the world, right? This seems to me one of the biggest things the book is trying to say. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking something along those lines. Relativism, it works in theory, but once you deal with the fact that people's beliefs influence their actions, then it's having real consequences, and that's another huge thing against him. You can't have, if you say everybody can believe whatever they want, it's fine by your point of view. You have to be tolerant of all the actions that spur out of these different beliefs.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's some very clear issues with that. I would hope that we can see.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. It leaves everybody kind of right back where they started, just go do whatever, just don't think about it, kind of almost in a way. I did like how I like what you said, Dustin, too. I'm with you on this, and like how as the book progressed, I mean, Sarah tried to set herself against Zach in establishing this fallibilism and all this stuff as like an alternative to relativism, but eventually the conversation kept on getting pulled more and more and more toward what is a reasonable course of action to take. Like, how can we reasonably act within the world? Because this is where everyone was tripping over themselves. Like, Zach couldn't figure out how to work in the world. Even Sarah, with her fallibilism, kept on making mistakes, and she was being undermined. Her own decisions were being undermined by her fallibilism. So it eventually just kind of devolved or increased, I mean, whatever you want to say, but it was eventually drawn to how can one reasonably act in the world, when they couldn't really come to an agreement on that either, which I thought was interesting. That was the end. I would say that would be like the end of chapter 3. But it did become clear that Zach couldn't provide you with anything at all, really, to help you choose what to do.
Right. I mean, this is where at the end of chapter 3 it comes up with like, well, relativism is about liberation. If everybody's viewpoint is just their own, that means you don't have to be forced to choose any one of them. You can do your own thing.
Yeah.
But then the point becomes, how do you choose?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're always tripped up by reality. Right. You don't want to just spin some dice and whatever comes up, like, well, I'm a Christian now. Look, the dice was an 8. Right, like that's it. That's not how you can live in the world, and you can't even convince yourself like that. That's just not how you breathe and live. Like I just like how, and eventually, what it comes down to is that your practical life mode, if you want to call it like that, or your practical way of living in the world, is what's going to have to ultimately influence how you be and act and think in the world. Right? I mean, because you live in the world, you need to have a sensible idea of what's true and false. And everything you do reaches out to the world, right? And to pretend that it doesn't, right? To pretend that you're not making statements about the world can potentially be dangerous, is one of the points, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine, and just to be the Bob and interject, ultimately futile, and off-color examples. But you can imagine if I were to say something like, I don't know, all black people are idiots. That's not. But don't be offended. That's just my point of view.
Yeah.
That's me saying this to a black person. It's just my point of view that's all black people are idiots. So you shouldn't be offended because that has not. Of course, that has no bearing on you because I'm a relativist. This would sound very unconvincing to him.
Yeah. I mean, they kept on hammering this point too, that it's my point of view just amounts to I think that.
Yeah.
It's my point of view that this pen is black. It really just amounts to I think this pen is black.
Yeah.
And then it just boils right back down to, well, why do you think the pen is black? Right? It's not like you're really escaping much.
Yeah. And then you just, as we learned in like elementary school little writing class, you can just chop those I thinks right off.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. For some reason, I always thought of the arrogance of mighty Western, we'll just even use the word privileged nations or rich privileged nations, looking at poorer nations and saying, what a pure, wonderful way of life. How simple, how wonderful. But then the people will come and say, well, why don't you live like us then? Yeah, no, nah, I don't want to live in a dirt house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Before we get too far, I just forgot I need to interject. Like, that was not my viewpoint I was presenting earlier.
Okay. Well, that's only your point of view, right? I mean,
it's my
from my perspective.
That was not my point of view.
Okay.
I was using that as an example of why this is dangerous. Please, internet, do not think I hold prejudice against black people in that manner. Sorry. I should have prefaced that.
So, no, yeah, you're right. But you're right. Definitely, I agree. It does remind you of that, though. It does remind you of somebody who just, how should I say it? Like, then they come up with this excuse that Zach does, like, well, I just grew up in this society where we live in houses made of wood and concrete.
Yeah.
So, I just couldn't fit in. But that looks really great for you.
Isn't that great for you?
That looks
Isn't
really
that cute?
nice for you.
That's so cute that you live like that.
Yeah.
That's great. Wonderful. I can pat you on the head.
I'm sure that's
wonderful.
really great for you.
Or the same, like Bob notices this arrogance when he talks about witchcraft. He's like, well, you're just paying lip service to my belief. You don't even care. You didn't even bother to check. You didn't even want to know if it's real. Not interested if it's real. You're just patting me on the head and saying, isn't that nice? It helps you. It helps you live. That's what you need to get through the day. All right, you just live like that, my friend, right? It reeks of a certain arrogance, right? I mean, you're not engaging these people on any level. It really is this kind of God's eye view of, like, yeah, well, that's cute, right? I don't know. That's one of the things that, I don't know, can bring bad feelings. This is one of the things that sparks Bob against Zach in the beginning.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic because Zach's whole thing was he wanted to be popular. Yeah. He wanted to be liked by everyone. That's why he's always his interjecting thing. Imagine I'm talking to somebody important. Not, of course, like you three. You three are very fascinating. But he just interjects this constantly because he's very concerned. Well, he's putting forth, it doesn't matter what other people think. It's everybody's this point of view. Everybody's opinion is right, but he cares what other people think about it.
Yeah.
Whereas Roxana states. Yeah. It's quite the contrary. I don't care what people think about me. That's why she's so rude. I don't even care what I think about myself.
Yeah. You're right. She comes right out and says that. Yeah.
Yeah, and like one thing that I want to ask Zach is, why would you ever change your opinion then? I mean, he has no account of change.
Yeah.
He doesn't know why would he even change his view? He has no reason why. He can't even formulate why, other than kind of weird external effects like, well, the culture told me this, but yeah. I mean, it gets weird when you start taking relativism to certain degrees. Like, how much are you a relativist? Because often when people are relativists, they're like, oh, this culture, like, oh, Chinese culture is this, or Vietnamese culture is this. Okay, maybe for you, but then how's the person living inside Vietnam going to do this? Is he going to say, like, well, I have to obey all of my culture? Or is it going to be like, well, inside Vietnamese culture, well, this is true for me and this is true for you, right? I mean, how far and how big do you take your relativism? It starts to break down on so many levels when you just say, well, that's just the way the Vietnamese do it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, but every single one of them? I mean, do we have to take them as a group, or is their culture a solid brick wall? No, it's not. There are dissenting views inside of all Vietnam. So, I mean, it starts to break down in just every single place you can look. I don't know. I really do think the fact that change is impossible when you do this. Like, if you say, like, well, that's just Japanese culture. Okay, that's like when you ask a Japanese person, why do you do this? And they say, because we're Japanese. Yeah, I knew that. I knew you were Japanese. Like, why do you do this? Because I'm me. Sounds
like an awesome answer sometimes, though.
I mean, like, I kind of get what they're saying. I'm not a complete, internet autist. I get what they're saying, right? Like, but it's not a very good answer at all, even what they ultimately mean, right? Like, this is our value structure, or this is our tradition, this is what we do to distinguish ourselves, right? It still it's not a very good meaning, right? I mean, but when they say things, well, this is because we do this because we were born and raised in Japan. Okay, do you honestly believe that? I mean, I just want to ask them, do you honestly believe that? Because if you do, then how do you act in the world? Right? If every one of your actions is just like, well, why am I doing this? Well, because that's what we do. Right? Do your actions really have meaning? Do you really believe that? And this is one of the points at the end of the book, right? I mean, like, how does one act on one's morals if one simply believes, well, yeah, this is just what I believe. You've undermined yourself right from the beginning, right? Well, I believe that we'll go all controversial today because Jesse opened that door, right? Like, I believe that rape is bad. I believe that rape is bad, but that's just my opinion, right? You're it's weird when you undermine yourself right there. How do you justify stopping rape then? Like, if it's just your opinion, it's a game you can't play.
Yeah, I mean, we could just play the relatives game. It's going to sound okay. I'm going to preface this one because it's going to sound terrible. Well, like I say, okay, from my point of view, rape is a bad thing. But from your point of view, rape could be a very good thing. You're not wrong. I'm not wrong.
I mean, in a very broad definition of rape, some cultures did kind of have a forced marriage tradition for hundreds of years in every part of the world. So I mean, if you want to equate that to a kind of rape, I mean that's a real thing.
I mean, it's weird. Like when you take it to this extreme level, it just gets weirder and weirder. I mean, like if you really hardcore in your relativism and you really think that there's no justification for any moral belief, that it's all just opinions, then there's no justification for having that weird rape culture. But there's no justification for ending it either. Yeah. Right? There's no justification for anything. There's no justification for participating in it. There's no justification for ending it. There's no justification for ignoring it. There's no justification for anything. Right? We're all just done. It's all done.
I like what happens there because Sarah falls into this trap because she's very she has this kind of objective view about the world, but when it comes to morality, she's a moral relativist, at least in the beginning. Yeah. But what she has to do is she has to rely simply on brute force.
Yep.
She's like, well, I'm stronger than you, and that's my justification. That's why I can force you to do what I want, because I'm stronger. Even she can't believe that, right?
Yeah.
Even it doesn't satisfy her either. So when you start to lose. When you start to stop talking about the world and you start talking about yourself only, then everything turns down to just kind of power and force, which is exactly Zach's world, right? He doesn't reach out to the world anymore, so there's nothing to do but simply, I don't know, if you wanted to stop slavery, you just simply have to invade with a bigger army, and that would be it.
I mean, assuming someone's not willing to listen to you, or seemingly like you don't even want to reason. I suppose if there's nothing to reason about, first of all, if you don't even believe there's anything to reason about, I mean, conversation wouldn't even begin. So, it's where it's interesting though. This is where like the relativist finds, I think, some of his appeal too, in the sense that like the relativist steps in and says, no, don't fight. Don't fight. Just live together and accept each other's viewpoints. Yeah. Right.
This I like. I like this. I mean, like we do need to learn to live better. Like YouTube is terrible at living together, as I've seen recently. Like whenever anyone does anything wrong, they're just gonna have to force these people off via any method whatsoever, be it harassment, Twitter harassment. I don't know what it is, but. Someone's wrong on the internet, well, just harass them until they're gone, right? They just can't leave anybody alone. So yeah, I agree that's something that is the impetus of relativism, and I'm happy to accept that. However, I don't know, I don't like anything else there.
I think what was his name again? Timothy Williams?
Yes, yeah. Timothy Williams.
I'm curious if he thinks relativism leads to this, because there was that, when they're kind of like halfway through the argument, and Zach starts getting some heat, and he said, "God, I try to be a peacekeeper, and now you're turning on me. What the hell?" And then Sarah says something I thought was very interesting. She says, "We were 3 minutes before agreeing to disagree, and then you came in and muddied the water."
Yeah.
So it seems to perhaps be he's trying to hint the author, or is trying to hint, relativism doesn't lead to these kind of truths. Yeah. Truths that it thinks it does. It actually in a way.
It's weird. I like how in the book it this is true of real life too. I mean, like you're never quite sure, and I think this guy, I mean, Timothy Williamson. Timothy Williamson is he doesn't know where it'll lead to. I think relativism is unclear about where it will lead. Will it lead to violence? Will it lead to coming to terms with each other at the end? That like it seems like Sarah's just sick of even thinking about it and says like, I don't care what your muddled way of thinking does lead to. I'm not even going to concern myself with that anymore. I'm just going to concern with myself with trying to get what's true or what's not true.
But Sarah does come to the important realization that what we need is humility in the face of our own mistakes, and the fact that we don't possess ultimate truth all the time. Just a kind of a warning, a constant warning against how fallible we really are. And given the last couple of centuries, maybe we need that warning. But I really do think like maybe relativism was a panicked attempt to stop all this immediately. Like we just can't do this anymore. And it's also, I don't know, I really do think relativism is just simply a despair. They just see people arguing on the internet and they're like, well, that can't ever fix anything. This discussion will lead nowhere. No one ever is convinced. It's all worthless. Everyone just believes what they believe. And they're going to write a bunch of books about how you're just a bunch of unconscious forces anyway. So if you go into a room and it smells bad, you're just going to become a conservative. So, what are you going to do, man? There's no point in talking about anything at all. It really feels like just a movement born out of despair at the ability to come to any kind of rational argument. And relativism is just simply a way to undermine reason.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's despair, and when it gets into the moral realm too, I think it's a lot of it also comes from this way of thinking. Who are you to say that ABC is wrong? Who are you to tell the Japanese that they're wrong to whatever they eat sushi? I don't know. Who are you to say XYZ? Right? It's this whole like stop, get off your high horse. Be a little bit more humble. You're not God, etc., etc. I mean, it's appealing in its humility, but again, it doesn't lead anywhere. I think this is some of the appeal, though.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the part where it gets dangerous with morality. I mean, like, Sarah doesn't think morality can be objective. That's why she rejects it as being able to be discussed objectively. You can't measure morality, is what she said, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, eventually they're going to argue her down to, well, you can measure the effects of certain things, but ultimately it comes to the fact that we have to act in the world. And Sarah also, in that last chapter, she acts just the way she really is. She sees someone slap a child, and being the imperialist kind of baby imperialist that she is, she walks over and tries to stop her, right? Even though she is a moral relativist, she's already a universalist, right? She just needed a little bit push there. She went over and tried to stop that. If she was really the Zach kind of relativist, she would have just saw that slap and be like, well, that's just how some people raise their kids. What are you going to do? Right? So there's part of her that's already just universal all the time.
Yeah.
She just needed some pushing to get there. But I don't know, when you get down to the nitty gritty and morality, I mean, it's going to be really, really tough. I mean, like, they kind of dance around it a little bit, and then I like ultimately where this is going to head is moral statements both describe and prescribe actions in the world, which is what gives them their force, right? Yeah. I mean, that's why you can assign true and false judgments to them, because they do both describe the world and tell you what you should do at the same time. But both of these things have to be going on. Zach tries to strip them away, right? It doesn't say. Zach wants to say, well, all moral statements are you should do this, and that's it. He denies that moral statements are making statements about the world. Again, Zach is just trapped in his own world, right? He's back to Plato, right? Yeah. He's trapped in himself, right? And he can't reach out to the truth.
Which, in a sense, almost turns them into gibberish. I mean, they have no meaning at that point. It would just be like blah 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 blah. I'm not talking about anything. I'm just making a bunch of gibberish. It doesn't relate to anything in the world. So yeah. But I think the whole thing does kind of, in a sense, it boils down to how we want to act in the world. I mean, that's how the conversation resolves itself, right? I mean, just the kind of world Zach is aiming for they said right at the end is a world where everyone holds a bomb, right? And whatever they do with that bomb, that's their business. Whereas it seems like Sarah and Bob are aiming at different worlds than Zach.
I think Zach comes off really, really bad in that point in the book too.
Yeah.
Because he has always been this advocate of peace, non-conflict, and then what was it? Bob makes the it's like everybody's got a bomb comment, which it seems to be alluding to terrorism, perhaps, and Roxana says, yeah, if any of them ever go off, and Zach, desperate to defend himself, says, well, sometimes they're time bombs.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's like, are you helping your case there, friend? I understand, the metaphor there. Sometimes, it sinks in, and then, okay, we realize, all right, yes, relativism is the solution. Like a time bomb, but...
Yeah. We learned art was a time bomb, too, last time.
That's right.
We learned art was a time bomb, too, last time.
Yeah.
Books were time bombs, too.
So many bombs.
So many bombs in the new Tractatus.
And arguments, too, can be time bombs.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's getting at. So the conclusion of this book, I don't know. I took the conclusion of this book. I mean, we didn't get very far. I mean, but we got far enough. The train finally got to its destination, and I think ultimately the destination, what the wisdom that dawned on these people was they didn't get to resolve their conflict. Bob didn't become a scientist. Sarah didn't start believing in the occult and witchcraft. But what they learned was that they have to continue the debate. They can't go down the road of ignoring and not talking about the world and just saying, well, everybody has their own point of view. They've realized that that's impossible. It doesn't work. They have to live together. They have to know how fallible they are, and the argument has to go on.
Yeah.
Isn't it like this kind of rational debate? It's philosophy. Yeah. Yeah, philosophy.
Yeah, ultimately the book was a big circle jerk for philosophy.
Yeah,
Imagine
philosophy.
that, a philosophy book that endorses philosophy.
No.
The brain is the most important organ, according to the brain. All right.
That being said, I totally agree.
I totally agree, too.
And, of course, I do have to restate at this point that there was one person who ran from the stable.
The witch? No.
No. Zach, yeah.
Zach.
That
Yeah.
was kind of the last dig. Well, of course, maybe the enchanted dig was the last dig. Where it was a last dig at relativism. Relativism, he's saying, listen, we have to stay on this train and keep talking. And Zach's like,
yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm out of here, man.
I have business that's up further on the train.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's kind of a slap in the face is to somebody, actually.
Yeah.
Well, he's got to go do the sacrifices with Polemarchus and Cephalus, right? You got to go talk to Cephalus up there.
Yeah. That's right. Hey, Cephalus, if you have a bomb and you sell it to and your friend makes you hold the bomb and he wants it back after he's gone mad.
Oh, wow.
But what if it's a time bomb?
So I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was great. It was non-technical, accessible to everyone. Good. I mean, this is kind of some stuff that you would encounter in a Philosophy 101 class, but it gives you a lot of good stuff to chew on, thinking about relativism again. And I haven't thought about relativism in a while, but it really is such a popular viewpoint on the tubes or in real life that...
I deal with it all the time. So.
I mean, I think it's. I really think it really is just everywhere. It's just unconsciously everywhere. This was in the. There were some op-ed pieces in like the New York Times and stuff about this, about like how relativism is just so commonplace. I mean, it's been commonplace for a while, and that's why Ellen Bloom not yeah. Alan Bloom wrote his Closing the American Mind and all this stuff, but I mean, relativism just isn't going away. It's just our young college kid default thinking mechanism.
Yeah. I mean, with seemingly laudable goals, but ultimately riddled with errors. And I mean, ultimately, I think I can save, given if we had a longer video, the charge that Nietzsche is somehow in cahoots with these people. I really don't think he is. And obviously Wittgenstein too. I mean, he uses Wittgenstein for his own purposes, but Wittgenstein's definitely not there.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was surprised because Wittgenstein, it was clear who was towing Wittgenstein's actual line in the story.
Yeah, just this stuff. Yeah, right. Basically, this stuff about language games. It got kind of crazy for a while. So I guess that's how Wittgenstein got lumped in with the whole relativism zone. So.
Well, it really mixes good with that non-overlapping magisteria, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, well, we're just talking about different things, man.
Yeah. I'm saying slab, and you're painting Martians.
Yeah. See.
Who are watching old men slide up hills.
Yeah.
Is he going up the hill? Is he going downhill? That's just your opinion, man.
All interpret our own way.
Yes. Well, one day we have to redo the philosophical investigations for the YouTubes. So I guess other than that, they cut the video short, so we don't have to do always such a long video. Anyone have anything they want to say before we sign off?
Want to throw out, given my uncouth with opening door controversy aside, I think this is a very good book, easy to read. It's 160, 150 pages or so, but I read I powered through it in 4 days. That's not something you can usually do in philosophy. So yeah, if anybody is looking at the philosophical investigations sitting over on the shelf at the bookstore and thinking this looks scary, this is a good way to ease yourself into it.
There you go. Yeah, I agree. I totally recommend the book. I mean, if it's even just good to have around, I like dialogues. I just like dialogues. I mean, I came across this guy in the first place because he wrote an op-ed. Was it for the New York Times? I can't remember. He wrote an op-ed where he kind of was praising Plato for his dialogue format, and I agree that I really think sometimes philosophy works get lost in the fact that people don't see where they fit in. They don't see how this fits into any real conversation we're having. And I wish philosophers, I mean, the dialogue is a great way to reassert, this is what we're talking about. This, then this, then this, then this. This is how we got here. This is how this conversation gets here.
Yeah.
We need to remind people of that.
And also how it is with everything else that's in the ether, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so important. If you want to do an example of how philosophy is done, like in the real world, or how it's done even on the YouTubes, it is done like this, in a discussion, back and forth, each hitting each other back with different thoughts and ideas, right? This is what it really looks like, so it's much more relatable, too.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're just so obsessed with reading these academic essays, right, without actually engaging in dialogue, right? So, but this is also fun too. I think so. That's why we have our channel. So,
wow, you took that all the way back to being just an advertisement for our channel. Awesome.
That's why Tokyo Philosophical Society is a great channel.
Yes.
So again, it just came back to a circle jerk for our channel.
Yep.
Yeah.
Please like, subscribe, tell your friends. And we don't have a Patreon, so if you want to give us money, you can just contact us directly and we'll find a way to get it. If there's enough demand, we'll set up a Patreon or something.
Yeah, it's right. A Shibuya Taco Bell Patreon.
Yeah, this is one of the few times I don't want to say, don't patronize me. Come on, patronize me. All right.
Patreonize me.
Patreonize me. Not that we even have one. All right. So that's all for this time. We're going to have another book coming up next. But definitely check this book out and watch Timothy Williamson. I think he's got some interesting essays up on the net, too. You can look him up. Maybe we can even provide links later too. Maybe. All right. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.